think I thought heroin was my friend. I think I thought that that won't betray me, that won't use me, that won't take anything from me, when really it was taking everything away from me. Between 19 and 20 is when I started using Oxycontin. And I didn't understand the important part of Oxycontin. I didn't understand what it did to people. All I knew is there were some friends that enjoyed it, and then I realized that my grandma was prescribed it. Then I started taking my grandma's prescription and filling it and giving it to my friends, and then that's when I decided I'm going to use too. A drug dealer that I was going through said, I don't have any Oxycontin, but I have heroin. And I thought, oh, I said, I don't want to try that. I said, I heard bad and it can be mixed with a lot of things. And they're like, have I ever given you anything bad before? Do you trust me? And of course I said, yes, I trust you. She was an older lady, I thought she was my friend. So I snorted it. And right then and there, my body knew I was addicted. I knew that I could get higher, faster with something that would cost a lot less. Heroin was the kind of drug that if 5 minutes ago I had a fight with someone, and as long as there was heroin 5 minutes later, that fight never existed. Heroin was the kind of drug that seemed to, for me, erase the past. Erased what I said last week. When am I gonna be able to get high? That's all my life revolved around. When am I gonna get high? When am I gonna get high? Is this over yet? Is this over yet? I remember my aunt's funeral a few years ago. I was waiting for drugs outside of the church. And it's like, I think I forgot most of the funeral. And because I was waiting to get high. I didn't care. I didn't care about what debt I accumulated. I didn't care about who I hurt, what I said, how abusive I was verbally, mentally, emotionally, to anyone I loved, and my family. And the heroin is just so strong. It's so strong. I mean, it's like, I chose heroin over my own family. I put heroin on a pedestal and everything else on the back burner. I'm sure I probably would have killed or robbed or really hurt somebody if I got that desperate enough. I've been clean now 14 months, and if I wasn't in prison, I wouldn't be clean. I earned a 3-year incarceration for manufactured delivery of heroin, followed with a 3-year term of probation. It's weird because I always told myself I will never be one of those people that will let a drug take advantage of them and go to prison. And I used to drive by these prison gates and think of, I don't know how people could go to prison. And here I am, this is my home, this is my life right now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul Millard with Sunny 97.7 and AM 1170. I'd like to introduce to you right now Greg Stensland, the news director with Radio Plus Incorporated, which is Sunny 97.7, AM 1170, 96.1 TCX, and the Great 98 radio station.
All right, thanks, Paul, and thank all of you for attending tonight. I think the size of this crowd, standing room only crowd, shows that this community cares about this issue and that it's a serious issue. And over the course of the next couple of hours, you're going to hear from law enforcement, you're going to hear from social services, you're going to hear from the medical side of things, you're going to hear from counselors, recovering addicts, and families of victims. I would like to recognize a couple of people in the audience, some special guests who are with us who are not on the panel. 2 state lawmakers, Representative Scott Krug, who represents the 72nd Assembly District, and Representative Jeremy Thiesfeld of Fond du Lac, who is the 52nd Assembly District State Representative. Kevin Meeham is a public health nurse from Waushara County's Health Department and a member of the Wisconsin Heroin Task Force. Kevin serves on the Northwoods Coalition Board of Directors, and that's the state's largest and oldest coalition dedicated to substance abuse prevention. And also in the audience, Rebecca Johnston and Brandon Kellogg from a group that's called Teen Challenge. And it's a faith-based organization focused on young adult substance abuse, addiction, healing, and rehabilitation. Rebecca comes here on invitation of First Lady Tonette Walker. Teen Challenge is one of the First Lady's key initiatives. So thank you for being here this evening. I think the timing is perfect for this summit. There was a Heroin Summit earlier this year in Waukesha that also resulted in a standing room-only crowd, and just this week the U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder called the increase in heroin-related deaths an urgent public health crisis. He said first responders should carry with them an antidote to reverse the effects of an overdose. In a video message that was released yesterday, the Attorney General said addiction to opiates and heroin is affecting Americans from every background and walk of life. The Attorney General said the number of heroin overdose deaths rose by 45% between 2006 and 2010, and says federal law enforcement is working to address the problem, but that more work is needed when it comes to education and prevention. And we'll find out what the problem is like here. Does it mirror the rest of the state? Does it mirror the rest of the nation? I will tell you this, it's been described to me on more than one occasion by people that I've talked to. It's been described as an epidemic. And yesterday I was looking at some news stories that I've done over the years on heroin, and I pulled up a story from 3 years ago, and the lead sentence in that story is area law enforcement say heroin trafficking and use in Fond du Lac in the Fox Valley is reaching epidemic proportion. And in that story, Fond du Lac Judge Peter Grimm said friends and family of drug users need to be more proactive, and that the addiction and problems will only worsen if they are ignored. And that was his message from 3 years ago, and here we are today. Our first presenter is from law enforcement. Fond du Lac Police Chief Bill Lamb has served in the law enforcement profession for 25 years. I believe that's correct. He was born and raised in Fond du Lac. He attended UW Fond du Lac and UW Oshkosh and earned his bachelor's degree in administration of justice at Marian University. He's also a graduate of the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. He began his law enforcement career in 1988 with the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department. He joined the North Fond du Lac PD in '91, where he worked until June of 2011. He was the police chief in the village of North Fond du Lac for 10 years, and now is the police chief in the city of Fond du Lac. And on the radio last week, the chief said the heroin epidemic is a problem we cannot arrest our way out of. So our first speaker tonight, Fond du Lac Police Chief Bill Lamb. Bill?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. We'll wait 1 second for them to get my slide loaded here. It is a great privilege to be able to stand in front of you tonight and talk about a problem that has posed a more significant impact on a community than anything else I have seen in my 20-plus years in law enforcement. The heroin problem that we're dealing with, as Mr. Stensland just just shared some words that I had shared on his show last week. It is truly an epidemic that we are dealing with. And we're going to talk a bit more about why that is the case. And now heroin in our community. 4 years ago, our drug task force officers reported that the occasions where they would run across heroin, slim to none, handful of times a year. 2013, just last year, our drug task force officers put together 131 felony drug trafficking cases. 67 of them, so about 51%, were heroin. Now that number was much higher in 2012. It actually dipped a little bit in 13. A couple of reasons for that I don't have time to go into tonight. But in 2012, that number was more like 70 or 80% of all of those drug cases. So from 4 years ago to 2013, this drug has absolutely dominated the landscape in the drug work that our drug task force officers are doing. So how do we compare throughout the rest of the state of Wisconsin? Fond du Lac County, one of the ways that they measure drug impact or prevalence in a community is by submissions to the state crime lab. Fond du Lac County was the 10th highest county in the state of Wisconsin with submission rates to the crime lab for heroin. We're higher than Outagamie and Racine counties. Now, as many of you probably know, those are both counties that have significantly higher populations than us. Racine borders Milwaukee County and is pinched in between Milwaukee and Chicago. Interestingly, Chicago-Milwaukee, that is the pipeline for which 90, 95, perhaps 98% of the heroin that hits the streets in the city of Fond du Lac comes from Chicago up through Milwaukee in here. So that statistic, without Outagamie and Racine, speaks volumes. Comparably speaking, we're a little bit lower than Winnebago, although pretty close, and almost identical to Sheboygan County to our east and Washington County to our south. So it just gives you a little bit of a perspective of this part of the state of Wisconsin. So what happened? Heroin is a rage that swept our nation several years ago. It's not just our community. You heard Mr. Stensland talk about remarks shared by the United States Department of Justice. This is a problem that is impacting the entire country, not just Fond du Lac, not just Wisconsin communities. It began with an epidemic of opiate-based narcotic painkillers back, say, about 2005. So between 2005, 2009, 2010, that became the drug that our drug task force officers were primarily dealing with. Just to use a couple of the brand names, although there are a number of them, use OxyContin, for instance, okay? Very commonly prescribed prescription painkiller. Then preventative efforts began to kick in. There were a number of changes made inside the medical industry. There were, to combat prescription fraud, to combat prescription drug abuse. There were actually some compound changes made to one of the drugs where they'd try to crush it, it would kind of turn into a jelly. So as they began to make that drug more and more difficult to get, then what happens? Enter heroin, okay? Now for those of you who have a business background, it's basically the same product. Opiate-based prescription painkillers have essentially the same high as heroin because they all are derived from the opium poppy, okay? Volume, there were an absolutely astonishing, or there has been an absolutely astonishing amount of heroin that is essentially pouring across the border of principally Mexico. I mentioned before, most of the heroin that hits our streets comes up Mexico, up to Chicago, and in Chicago to the Fond du Lac area. So it became very easy to obtain and cheap. Pills, prescription painkiller pills, were going for about $40 to $50 a pill on the streets here in Fond du Lac. You can get a heroin high on the streets of Fond du Lac for somewhere 20 to 50 bucks per high. It's about 1/10 of a gram. It depends on the purity of the drug, okay? But clearly, it's a lot cheaper high. So what's the impact on our community been? Overdose deaths are undoubtedly the most tragic. I'm not going to talk much about those because you're going to hear those down the panel here tonight. But I'll focus on the addiction. Today's heroin is projected to be basically 10 times more potent than the heroin that was around back in the 1970s. Many of you recall it was a very popular drug back in the 70s, but very, very different drug. 10 times more potent, and therefore 10 times more lethal. The addictions reported after merely experimentation. You saw in the video at the beginning of the program, used it once, I was addicted. That, folks, is alarming. So addictions lead to, amongst other things, crime. Because the simple fact of the matter is, addicts will not generally hold a job, but addicts will not give up their habit. Addicts will do whatever is necessary to feed and fuel that addiction. And unfortunately, folks, that oftentimes means burglarizing, stealing, assaulting, doing whatever it takes to get the means to feed or fuel that addiction. So that's why we have this panel here. That's why we're so grateful to see so many of you in the audience, because this is a broad community concern. Yes, addicts are in need. They're indeed victims of that addiction, and that has to be addressed. But there's another set of victims, and that, ladies and gentlemen, are you folks, your loved ones, your friends, your neighbors. The drug addiction, heroin in particular, because that's the vast majority of the drugs that our drug task force officers are dealing with. There is a drug component in the vast majority of the crimes that we are seeing committed in our community, particularly property crimes. So who are those victims of those burglaries, robberies, or assaults? Are there addicts? Sure, sometimes an addict will steal another heroin addict's heroin or other type of drug. Sometimes they'll steal what little money they may have, but typically speaking, that addict's going to be in the same boat as the one who's looking for the means to get that next fix. So oftentimes they're going to turn to folks that have gainful employment, that have nice homes, nice cars, because there's the source of the money that they need. Like I said, oftentimes that is your loved ones, your friends, or you folks. So some local examples. We pulled the last 6 armed robberies we've had here in the city of Fond du Lac and the last 10 residential burglaries, so the last 10 home burglaries. Now, we can articulate as of now, and there aren't arrests made yet in all of these cases, but we can articulate in those last 6 armed robberies, 3 of them were committed because of that drug addiction. There have been 2 arrests where we can articulate that in those residential burglaries, they were committed due to that drug addiction. And of the remaining 8, where we do have suspects but have not yet built enough probable cause to make the arrest, we've already identified that the folks have a significant drug history. So do the math, connect the dots, and as time goes on, I suspect that that number, just like the robberies, will begin to at least get to that 50% of those, if not more like 70 or 80%. So imagine how this can impact you, victim of an armed robbery. Either you, if you have a teenage son or daughter that works someplace that's robbed, imagine the impact of having a gun stuffed in your face. Imagine having a knife held to your throat. Imagine coming home on vacation and your home's been burglarized, your business has been burglarized. Maybe an elderly woman, mugged, knocked down, purse snatched. Car window smashed in, somebody takes an iPod, your purse, whatever the case might be, some type of a valuable left in the car. Now let's talk quickly about our most vulnerable victims. Prevalence of children in heroin trafficking cases, it's phenomenal. By comparison to crack cocaine, Special Agent Dunlap and I were talking just a couple of weeks ago. In our younger days, working the streets and drug task force work, it was rare to see people in the crack cocaine or powder cocaine trade business involving children. With heroin, we're seeing it all too often. Local examples, June 7/11, East 1st Street here in the city of Fond du Lac. Undercover heroin purchase ends up leading to an arrest situation. Female heroin trafficker flees with 2 children in the car, one 1 year of age, the other 2 years of age. May 1, 2013, again, another undercover heroin purchase by our drug task force agents. Husband and wife bring their 4-year-old son along with them. Later admitted that they had obtained their heroin earlier in the day in a street transaction in the city of Milwaukee with their 4-year-old in the car. October 28, 2013, South Main Street apartment here in Fond du Lac, drug house search warrant. Heroin and marijuana found in the house. Admissions that they were shooting up the heroin right before the search warrant was executed. Little 1-year-old baby walking around, easy access to the syringes and the heroin. It is truly a community-wide problem, folks. It's clearly not just about the heroin addict and the destruction of their own life. That needs to be addressed, but the ripple effect this is having throughout the community is devastating, to say the least. It's a community-wide problem. It's having an adverse impact on all of us. I don't care what your walk of life is in the community, and we need a broader community-wide response. 4 pieces to that we're going to talk about tonight. Enforcement, we have that well underway, but we have to work more on the prevention, education, treatment, harm reduction. So this is a call to action, folks. You took the time to come here tonight. I applaud each and every one of you for that, but please don't let it stop at this. After tonight, please reach out to somebody here, find out what you can do, because there are those other parts that we need to attack. Thank you, and there's my contact information for anybody that may not have it, and I would love an opportunity to hear from you after tonight. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. Chief Bill Lamb, I didn't mention this at the outset, but at the end of the program, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions of anybody that's on the panel, and we'll do that at the end of the program before we wrap up tonight. We're going to continue with the focus on the law enforcement end. Eric Toney is the Fond du Lac County District Attorney. He's been in that position for a little more than a year. He was elected in November 2012, and I remember when Eric was running for office, one of his concerns was he was seeing a lot of serious crimes that he didn't remember seeing when he was growing up in the city of Fond du Lac, and he was right. Overall, drug-related arrests, as Eric will tell you, have increased dramatically in just the last few years, and at this point, they're still going up. So here's Fond du Lac County District Attorney Eric Toney. Eric?
Thank you, Greg. You guys can hold the applause. We've got a lot of folks to get to, and I'm actually really excited to hear some of our other speakers that we have tonight. So I'm going to try and do my best to go under the 10 minutes they've given me. But what I want to try and do is share with you some of the statistics we've seen in the DA's office, and you can see some of those numbers up there. And what you're looking at the very top, it says drug-related charges. All that means is possession of drugs, delivery of drugs, things of that nature. It doesn't mean some of the things that Chief Lamb just referenced, an armed robbery, a burglary, home invasions, other types of charges of that nature. And what you can see is between 2011 to 2013, we have seen a significant increase in those types of charges that the District Attorney's Office has filed. The next group is, some of you might not be familiar with CHIPS cases, but those are children in need of protection and services. We don't just deal with drugs when we prosecute someone for a crime. As Chief Lamb said, some of these people have their children with them and they bring them into those situations. When we're dealing with those situations, we want to try and either remove the children from the home or make it a safe environment. And that, piggybacking off that, the TPR cases are next, and you can see between 1994 and 2012, we averaged 18 termination of parental rights cases per year. In 2013, that number jumped up to 47. In the statistics that we were able to pull, that's the highest number that we were able to go dating back to the late 1980s. Now, I mentioned the top statistics don't include an armed robbery, a burglary, thefts, other felony cases. You can see about a 248 case increase over the last couple years in felony cases that the District Attorney's Office has filed. A significant portion of that is related to drug cases. The cases that we're seeing are on the rise, and you heard Chief Lamb talk about some of the armed robberies. They're also getting more serious. The number of misdemeanors that were filed last year, as you can see, was the highest since 2003. And the last piece I have up there is reckless homicide charges. Those aren't the total number of overdose deaths that we've had in our county. Those are simply the cases that we've been able to prosecute. In 2007, we had 2. In 2008, there were 4. 2009, there were 4 again. Then in 2010, that number jumped to 12. 2011, there were 5. And again in 2012, that number was 11. And last year, there were 7. And I'm referring not just to heroin overdose deaths. This would include oxy pills, Percocet, a combination of those type of things. I know we're here for a heroin summit, but if you take one thing from my presentation, It's not just heroin that we're worried about. It's also the prescription pain medications that Chief Lamb also referenced. That's often a starting point for someone before they end up on heroin. A couple statistics. There was a survey done of 8th, 10th, and 11th graders within Fond du Lac County. And one of the things they surveyed was, what's the average age that someone first used marijuana? They came to the number 13.7 years old. Average age for cocaine, 13.1 years old. And the average age for heroin, 12.3 years old. This isn't a high school problem. It's not a post-high school problem. It could be middle school or earlier. Now, those numbers, there aren't a significant portion of kids in that survey that were using heroin, but I kind of heard the reaction from some of you. It's certainly an alarming statistic. One of the things we've been fortunate with in our office over the last few years, we've been able to get some support from our county board, and they've funded one full attorney position. I see our county executive and Ms. Goldsmith on the county board here, and they've also helped us support another large portion of an attorney position. Now, neither of those positions focus directly on drugs, but what they do is let the other attorneys in the office focus more of their time on those drug cases because they're not dealing with some of the other cases. So we're fortunate that members of our community and elected officials, our police chief and other law enforcement, have seen this problem. They've been helping us address it from the perspective of our office. This was a 2012 Fond du Lac Reporter headline, and when you saw those statistics before, this is a big reason you see a big increase in those numbers. Our law enforcement have made a significant commitment to addressing these cases, and in turn, in the district attorney's office, we've made a commitment to our law enforcement partners that we're going to take these cases seriously and that we're going to prosecute them. So we have a policy within our office that when we get what we would call a referral, where someone from the city police department or anywhere else says, we want you to prosecute this person for delivering heroin or possession of heroin, marijuana, cocaine, we will charge that case as it's being referred or higher if we can meet our burden of proof and show the elements. Our goal is when we put these cases in front of our judges, and I see Judge Sharp and Judge Grimm here today, that we're giving them an accurate reflection of what's going on in that situation. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and many of you probably are aware of this, when a case gets put in front of a judge, they don't get the police reports, they don't get the photographs, they don't get any information that the defense attorney or the prosecution shows them. So we want to make sure that they're seeing these situations for what they are, because we can make a sentencing recommendation to them, but if they don't find that that's supported by the information, they may not go along with it. So we want to make sure that our judges are getting the correct and accurate information so that they can make the appropriate sentence. And they can't do that if they don't have that information. A couple other areas that we're pretty excited about, and I'm not going to get into too much detail on some of these, but I talked about those CHIPS and TPR cases, and Chief Lamb has been outstanding in helping move forward a drug and endangered children program so that when law enforcement enters a situation and there are children involved, they get social services involved, we get those kids out of that home, and then we're also able to prosecute them, oftentimes for more than just drug charges for the endangering of the children. And another fantastic program that Carrie Nitz is going to be talking about next, a little segue for Carrie, is drug court. And she was the chair of that committee and did an outstanding job. When Carrie, don't give me a round of applause when I'm done, but give Carrie a round of applause when she presents, because I can tell you, actually, let's do that right now and give Carrie a round of applause. There have been a lot of people that have helped out in getting drug court. We're almost operational here in Fond du Lac County, but without Carrie leading that committee, I can tell you we wouldn't have gotten a couple $100,000 grant, and she led that committee. She kept people to deadlines, and Judge Sharp has been an outstanding part in getting drug court going as well. So, and you can give Judge Sharp a round of applause as well. I'm going to end my time now, but I want you all to know we have some outstanding members of our law enforcement. I see our sheriff here today. I said our county executive is here. They get the problem, and the fact that you're all here today tells me I think you all understand the problem. And to echo what Chief Lamb said, don't let tonight end your interest. Make it go beyond tonight. Thank you.
Carrie Nitz is a probation and parole agent with the Wisconsin Department of Corrections Division of Community Corrections. That's in Fond du Lac. She worked in Winnebago County for several years. Prior to coming to Fond du Lac, she was involved in the Winnebago County Drug Court Program from January of 2005 until March of 2012. And for the past couple of years, Carrie has been chairing the Drug Court Committee, and in talking with her just a couple of weeks ago, you've hired a coordinator, you're ready to go, and the drug court, which Carrie will be talking about tonight, is simply waiting for its first referral, as I understand it. So, Carrie Nitz.
Well, thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm deeply moved to see the turnout here tonight, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this new program that Fond du Lac County is going to start called the Fond du Lac County Safe Neighborhoods Drug and Alcohol Program. It started with an identified need by the in 2011, the Healthy Fond du Lac County 2020 initiative. From that, the drug-free communities was organized, and then from the drug-free communities is how the Drug Court Committee started. As mentioned by Greg, we applied for a federal drug court discretionary grant, which we were awarded in late of last year. This grant is in the amount of $350,000 over the course of 3 years to get our program running. So, why the need for a drug court? You heard both Chief Lamb and Eric Toney talk about the increase in the substance abuse in our community. We've seen an increase in babies being born addicted to substances, and as well as safe haven babies. The court has also seen an increase in repeat offenders for manufactured delivery of substances, as well as drug possession offenders. The Wisconsin Department of Corrections, in a 2-year period, saw almost a double in drug offense probationers come through our doors. So it's apparent that we need to try a different focus on how we're going to address this issue. Drug courts have been a national and state effort at addressing this issue. Currently in Wisconsin, there's 58 treatment alternative diversion programs. 23 of those, including Fond du Lac, are drug court programs. So what is a drug court? A drug court is a judicially monitored 3-phase intervention program for adults involved in the criminal justice system due to a nonviolent drug or alcohol motivated offense and who are having a difficulty remaining clean and sober. It's a collaborative effort with Fond du Lac County, the District Attorney's Office, the Public Defender's Office, the Probation and Parole Department, treatment providers, Department of Community Programs, and a drug court coordinator. And as Greg said, we just hired a coordinator, and that coordinator is Melissa Chancellor, and she is here somewhere tonight, over there. She started last week, so at this point, she's getting acquainted with the program, and we are just waiting for referrals. The primary purpose of our program is community safety, but our mission is to address criminal activity associated with addiction by balancing treatment, punishment, and rehabilitation, as well as instilling accountability in the participants in the program. And we attempt to do this through an alternative to incarceration. Our goal at the end is to develop a more productive citizen, lower the rate of recidivism, and promote a safer neighborhood for Fond du Lac County. As mentioned, it's a 3-phase program, and anticipated length of the program for a participant is 12 to 18 months. In the first phase, it's a minimum of 60 days, with a participant appearing in front of a judge for a court review every Friday. The second phase is a minimum of 120 days with biweekly appearances in front of the judge. And then the third phase is a minimum of 180 days with monthly appearances in front of the judge for court reviews. In all the phases, the participant is required to maintain employment, complete community service, attend support meetings, meet with their probation agent, meet with their drug court coordinator, comply with treatment, and they're subject to random observed drug testing. The Fond du Lac County Sheriff's Department has agreed to do our drug testing for us. Each participant is going to be assigned a color, and every morning they'll have to call a phone number to determine whether or not their color is called. If their color is called, they'll have a specified period of time to report to the Sheriff's Department to submit that drug test. There will be incentives and sanctions awarded based on behavior, and each participant is assessed a $750 participation fee. Of that $750, $250 of it can be deducted by completing 25 hours of community service. Upon successful completion, the participant will apply for a graduation from the program, and then there will be a graduation ceremony. Once there's enough graduates, we will begin an alumni, and those alumni will serve as mentors for participants in the program. The eligibility requirements for people to participate in our program, they have to be a Fond du Lac County resident, they have to meet the DSM-5 criteria for addiction, they have to be convicted of a drug or alcohol motivated offense. So we're not just talking, when we're talking about drug or alcohol motivated offense, we're not just talking about the manufactured delivery or the possession charges. We're talking, like Chief Lamb said, about the burglaries, the forgeries, the thefts, the offenses that people are actually committing to fuel their addiction. They cannot have a prior violent felony conviction on their record, and they must agree to abide by the rules of the drug court program. The referral process can basically come from anybody. You, as a family member of somebody who's going through the court system who is struggling with addiction, you can contact your family member's attorney or the district attorney's office, or you can contact Melissa, the drug court coordinator. Once we get a referral, well, the attorneys also themselves and the judges can refer people to. Once we get a referral, there has to be a joint agreement between the district attorney's office and the participant's defense attorney. Upon that agreement, they would then be assessed by the drug court coordinator to make sure they meet the criteria for addiction. And then after that, there is a unanimous decision made by the drug court team to accept this person into the program. Following their acceptance into our program, then they would get sentenced to probation, and as a condition of their probation, they would have to complete the drug court program. Why is this different? So, you know, everyone talks about these drug courts. Why is it different than what we're doing now? It's closer contact with these individuals. And like I had mentioned, it's a collaborative effort. These individuals are going to be meeting on a very regular basis per week. They could be meeting with their coordinator, their agent, and then meeting with their treatment provider, and then also going in front of a judge. So it's a lot more accountability for these individuals. They have to give back to the community by doing that community service. We really get involved with their families and educate their families and work with their families on how to deal with these individuals who are suffering from addiction. And we're broadening their support network, which is really what they need to help be successful. The statistics regarding treatment alternative diversion programs that have been evaluated over the past 4.5 years indicate a 56% completion rate of treatment alternative diversion programs, otherwise known as TAD programs. Participants who complete the program are 9 times less likely to be admitted to a state prison after program participation. Cost benefits include, for every dollar invested in a drug court, $1.35 is saved. In those last 4.5 years of the treatment alternative diversion programs, they've resulted in diverting 135,118 non-violent offenders with drug and alcohol problems from jail or prison. The intangible benefits that we're not going to be able to see is the increased employment and productivity of these individuals, the decrease in substance abuse, obviously, the decrease in health care utilization, the decrease in foster care placement, drug-free births, and avoided crime victimization costs. So, in closing, wrapping up here, I just want to say that I'm really enthusiastic and passionate about the start of this Fond du Lac County Safe Streets Drug and Alcohol Court program. I could sit up here and talk to you about statistics on how successful they are, but as Greg mentioned, I did work firsthand with Winnebago County for several years and saw for myself how the program works. It's very hard to overcome addiction. For those of you who have family members or maybe yourself have suffered from addiction, you know how hard it is. And to help these people along in this process and see them changing their lives is truly rewarding. So, thank you.
All right, and we continue with the law enforcement theme. Brad Dunlap is the, well, he runs the MEG unit for Lake Winnebago, and he's been doing that for a long time. He graduated in 1991 with a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice. He was hired by the Department of Justice Division of Criminal Investigation in 1992, and for the next 10 years, he was assigned to the Appleton Field Office, working on drug task force with Brown County, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and was promoted to special agent in charge, assigned as the project director for the Lake Winnebago area MEG unit in 2002. And I had an opportunity to interview Brad earlier this week on my program, and he's going to tell you where this heroin is coming from, what communities in the Fox Valley are impacted most. So, Brad Dunlap.
All right, hello everybody. Sorry about that. Does that count against my time? All right. What I want to talk about a little bit tonight, and again, the long story short with the bio, I've been doing drug enforcement in this community for about 25 years now, just shy of 25 years. My entire law enforcement career has been nothing but drug enforcement. So I got a fairly good idea of what's hot and what's not, and some of the patterns that we've talked about, that Chief Lamb talked about when he gave his presentation. And I would concur with him that the heroin epidemic or the heroin problem that we're currently having is by far one of the most severe that I've seen in my quarter century of drug enforcement. So I want to talk about where this all comes from and put this into some perspective, and then we'll start globally and sort of work our way down. There's several varieties of the poppy plant, because that ultimately is where heroin comes from. But this guy here, the Papaver somniferum, is the only subspecies or the only variety of the poppy plant that produces enough raw opium in concentrations that can then be used or synthesized into morphine and eventually synthesized into heroin. And it's important to understand that this drug, opium, has been around for over 9,000 years and was used by several different communities for medicinal purposes. And it wasn't until the early 1800s, about 1804, 1802, that morphine was first synthesized from opium. So the first step in this process, in this journey, is for the opium to be harvested, and there's three basic countries or regions where it comes from. We'll talk about that in a second. But it wasn't until the early 1800s that morphine was first synthesized, and it wasn't first injected routinely until the Civil War. In 1874, so about three-quarters of a century later, diacetylmorphine, which is heroin, was first synthesized. All right? 26 years later, around the turn of the century in 1900, there was an estimated 1/4 Americans that were addicted to narcotics. All right, and to put that into perspective of what the population of this country was at that time, and that's on the low end. 24 years later, in 1924, heroin production is outlawed in the United States. But it wasn't until 1956 that the drug itself was made illegal, that heroin was made illegal in this country. All right, there we go. I got it. So let's talk a brief history of heroin in this country, and specifically in the Midwest and more specifically in Wisconsin. By around the 1970s, so about 20 years after this drug was made illegal, most of the heroin that we saw in the Midwest was what we call Southeast Asian. That's SEA, that's the initials up there. Southeast Asian heroin. Very low purity, Chief Lamb alluded to this earlier. You're looking at about 3 to 5% for street level, and it's almost exclusively injected. And this is sort of as we think about heroin in the movies and we think about heroin that we sort of grew up with, if you will, this is the image that we have of somebody in the gutter dying with a needle in their arm, probably a street urchin, and they've started with alcohol, went to marijuana, then they tried every other hard drug known to man, and then they graduated to heroin and finally died. That was the image that heroin portrayed 40, 50 years ago. All right, and the lion's share, again, opium was produced in the Golden Triangle, Laos, Thailand, and Burma, hence the term Southeast Asian. Flash forward about 20 years, and the Afghanis and the Iranians, what we call Southwest Asian heroin, they began to get into the market in the United States. Historically, the majority of Europe's heroin had come from the Golden Crescent, which were those countries. This purity was, by about a factor of 10, several times more pure than the Southeast Asian heroin, which made it more attractive for the end user. All right. It was also during this time, in the 1990s, that the Colombians entered the market. And that's the third geopolitical region, if you will, that the poppy plant grows very well in that climate, is the Colombians. And they had extremely pure heroin, upwards of 80%. The highest concentration of a lab that DEA tested was 96% pure in New York, which is just phenomenally pure compared, again, to the 3% pure that we were seeing 30 years earlier. All right? So very, very high purity. This saturates the market for heroin in this country. But during this time, all right, in the early 2000s, OxyContin was the drug of choice of narcotic users. And it rapidly spread throughout the Midwest and dominated the narcotic scene for almost a decade. And it wasn't until 2010 when OxyContin was reformulated in order to prevent its abuse. Now we have sort of a perfect storm. We have a very, very high purity heroin that didn't exist 30 years prior to this, or 20 years prior to this. And now we've taken away that narcotic drug of choice. And I'm sure some of the doctors and certainly some of our other guests will be talking about how powerful this is. It's not just a psychological addiction. This is a physical addiction. So we take away what they are used to using, and heroin is the thing that's there to fill the void. The problem is with it being so pure, it just took off. And almost overnight, the seizures of heroin in the Fox cities just skyrocketed. Depending on the year, and again, I supervise a 4-county drug task force, but depending on the year, about 10% of the heroin that we're actually seizing from the supply side is being seized in Fond du Lac. Okay, so this is definitely a Fox Cities problem, as well as a Fond du Lac problem. So what is it that we were doing about this from the unit? Well, in the Fox Valley, from 2009 to 2010, 1 year, heroin seizures increased by a factor of 10 in 1 year. All right, and that's pretty significant for someone who's been in the game for a long time. That tells me something. Arrests for delivery of heroin or possession of heroin doubled in that 1 year. From 2010 to 2011, seizures doubled again in the Fox cities. Arrests doubled again in the Fox cities. And from 2012 to 2013, seizures doubled yet again, and arrests doubled yet again. So those are some of the alarming statistics from the drug enforcement perspective that I wanted to share. In 2013, the Lake Winnebago Area Meg Unit and other Valley law enforcement agencies seized almost a half a kilogram of heroin, which doesn't sound like a lot. You could fit a half a kilogram in this notebook up here, but a single dose is 1/10 of a gram or less. All right, and that 1/10 of a gram is sold on the street for around $40. So very, very, very profitable drug for sale. So let's talk about the face of the enemy, and this is what we're looking at right here. When the Colombians entered the market, the Mexicans weren't far behind. They have the best importation network by far than either the Golden Crescent or the Golden Triangle, and that's one of the reasons they dominated the market, in addition to the high purity of their product. And these are just some pictures of seizures that we've made in Fond du Lac in the Valley. This was a type of heroin that is actually kind of purplish in color. You can see it as it's broken down into smaller quantities. This was some of the original heroin that we saw in 2010 and 2011 that we know came from Colombia. That was very, very pure. We had several overdoses that resulted from this batch or this heroin. From a packaging perspective, you'll see heroin packaged almost exclusively either in little gem packs that you'll see in a second here, or in these little foil containers. This is black tar heroin. This is manufactured in Mexico, And we saw about a 50-50 split between black tar heroin and the Colombian heroin in the 2010, 2011. We don't see a lot of black tar anymore. Most of the heroin is the stuff that you just saw, sort of this grayish or brownish in color. Again, you see the packaging. Chief Lamb alluded to this earlier, but Milwaukee and Chicago are by far the most prevalent or the most immediate source cities for heroin. And I'd say, I'd echo his sentiments, 95, 98%, almost all of the heroin that's being sold on the streets of Fond du Lac today came through Milwaukee and Chicago. Eventually, if you trace it back far enough, it's coming from Mexico and Colombia. One of the things that's happened over the last few years is the purity now has started to decrease. I told you about the 96% purity that we saw in New York. The reason for that is that the drug cartels start to realize they have a saturated market. They increase their proceeds and their profits by decreasing the purity and making people take more and more of this drug. And that's very, very dangerous from an overdose perspective because sometimes the end user doesn't know the purity level that they're getting their hands on. That's one of the reasons that we've seen an increase in the number of overdoses. And in this community, we have now a mix of individuals. Some of these people who are going to Milwaukee and Chicago to pick up this drug are addicts themselves. They'll pool their money with a group of friends. They'll drive down to Milwaukee or Chicago, pick up the drug, and then return. Now, from a sort of a scary perspective, what we're starting to see is now the drug dealers themselves in Chicago and Milwaukee are turning a very hungry eye on our community and realizing we can come up here and make large profits by selling this drug. So now we're starting to see that influx, just like we saw with crack cocaine in the 80s and 90s, of these drug dealers coming up to our community. They have no ties here other than their drug trade. So again, you see some of the packaging. Dorman, or anything containing diphenhydramine hydrochloride, is often used as a cutting agent for the end user. One of the side effects of heroin is people will itch or get their skin will get irritated, so they'll use Dorman or some other diphenhydramine product to cut the heroin. And why do I show you this? There's parents in the audience, there's people who are concerned about this. These are some of the things that we in law enforcement look for as clues. Paraphernalia will include the syringes, the tourniquets, the little cooker cups, which you can see, the little tin cup, and of course the needles. I show this slide because heroin users will often use, remember, heroin's just a morphine high. That's all heroin is a derivative of morphine, ultimately a derivative of opium. But heroin is very, very good at getting that morphine in high concentrations into your brain. So oftentimes if people can't get their heroin, they have to have what we call a safety net or some other drug that they'll use, some other narcotic drug. And in this case, you can see a couple of tablets on the right-hand side there that are morphine sulfate and probably hydrocodone that they are using as sort of a safety net in case they can't get their high. All right, and last but not least, I'll close with this slide. This is an extremely powerful slide. This case actually was from Iron Mountain in the year 2000 when they were having a big problem before OxyContin hit the markets with heroin. What does this slide tell us about a narcotic user? This individual was a heavy addict. As you can see, this is his handwriting, not ours, on this slide. And when we took this guy down and we arrested him, he was selling large quantities of heroin in Iron Mountain. But what does this tell us about the narcotic user? They're ultimately going to turn to what? A narcotic dealer. All right, and Chief Lamb alluded to this earlier. So in addition to other crimes that are responsible for, heroin use is responsible for, this is just one more. It's creating dealers. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad Dunlap with the Lake Winnebago Area Metropolitan Enforcement Group Drug Unit. So that's the law enforcement perspective, but what is the medical community in Fond du Lac seeing? What is the emergency room? What about the obstetrician, gynecologist, the pediatricians? For the next 20 minutes, not 10 minutes, 20 minutes, we have three doctors. We have Dr. Nathan Larson, who I believe is the head of the emergency room. Is that correct? And I think you also work with people like Todd Jancourt at the fire department. Dr. Sarah Dennis is the obstetrician gynecologist. And of course, She's concerned about the effects on pregnant moms and the newborn. And Dr. Howard Dono is a pediatrician. How does this drug affect children? So we'll start with Dr. Nathan Larson, the ER director.
Good evening. It's good to be here. We have a good turnout. It's nice to see a lot of faces, and I'm sure most people here have been affected by heroin of some sort. I've been asked to talk a little bit about what we see in the emergency department and kind of front lines from the medical community. A little bit of numbers as far as use. The exact numbers are hard to come up with, but suspected opiate and heroin overdoses kind of follow in how much Narcan that we use. Narcan is the reversal agent. A quick couple numbers, 2006 we used 12 doses in the ER, which is not very much, once a month for all opiate addictions, for opiate reversals. Flash forward to 2009, we had 26 doses. That's 3 times from 2006. 2011 we had 51 doses. That's 4 times. 2013 we had 75 doses, and this year we're on track for 90 doses, which is 7.5 times the doses of what have been used since 2006. From a personal experience, we see lots of heroin and opiate addiction patients. There's been a kind of a change the last couple of years with the Wisconsin Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. So we're able to look up patients who are actually seeing and are using prescription drugs and trying to get those drugs from multiple different sources. So what we see is a crackdown on how much opiates are being prescribed, and which fits with what these gentlemen and ladies have been sharing this evening as an increase in heroin use, not only from an availability standpoint, but from a cost standpoint. From an ER standpoint, we typically see about 4 different types of patients that come in. One, either they're overdosed, they're apneic, they're not breathing, they're blue, and Todd Jankwart will talk a little bit about the EMS side standpoint, but we work very closely with the law enforcement and the EMS community in the ER. They get a dose of Narcan to reverse the opiates. These patients are not very happy. You've just killed their buzz. They're angry. They like to spit at you. They like to hit at you. So the emergency nurses, several of them here tonight, I'll give them a shout out to them. And they are truly frontline dealing with the combative portion of these and saving people's lives in real time. So not only do you get the heroin overdoses that come in, we also get the heroin withdrawal. And whenever we get a nice big drug bust in Fond du Lac County, we also see an increase in the next couple of days with heroin withdrawal. From mild symptoms to pretty severe symptoms of opiate withdrawal. I guess the plus side is that heroin withdrawal is not life-threatening, although many patients do feel like they want to die. It's very miserable to go through, lots of bad symptoms. So the goal in the ER treatment is to try to blunt that withdrawal response. You know, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, that goose flesh feeling, we call it piloerection. The goose flesh pops up and they just feel miserable. So the goal is trying to treat those symptoms. Most people don't get admitted for heroin addiction or withdrawal. We do admit people for heroin overdoses if they're requiring multiple doses of the Narcan to reverse it. But as far as the withdrawal, most people get referred as an outpatient to an AODA counselor and a psychiatrist to try to get on methadone or primarily Suboxone programs to try to keep off long term. The challenge becomes is that patients get frustrated because they want to be admitted right away to get right on the Suboxone, but they have to be completely off of opiates before they can go on Suboxone. They have to be through that withdrawal stage. And there's only a few psychiatrists in the county that actually prescribe Suboxone. So that's a challenge and difficulty trying to get patients to stay clean long enough to be able to get into the program. The other ones we see as far as the medical side effects and the problems of the heroin is the abscesses in the skin, and the infections in the heart valves called endocarditis. We see that as well. it's lots of different other side effects, you know, HIV transmission, hepatitis B, hepatitis C transmission. There's lots of other components as far as what we see in the medical community, not just the drug addiction itself or the crime that goes along with it. There's actually medical diseases that actually come with that. And the other thing we typically see is, you know, the other way is it's just completely incidental. We find track marks, we suspect it, we confront people, they usually deny. The common responses we usually get is, well, I'm just donating plasma, which is the common thing we see. So, you know, don't be fooled if someone's saying I'm donating plasma and they've got 50 needle marks in their arms. It's just not from plasma. So, you know, have a high index of suspicion for loved ones if you're thinking that they're using. You know, from a physician standpoint, we don't turn people into the police. They come in and they admit that they're doing heroin, or we find out they're doing heroin, or we have a positive drug screen. We don't call the police. I'm not the police. I love the police. We work with them very closely, but I'm not a police officer, and I really don't care if you're using. I mean, I do. I want you to get help, but my goal is not to get you in trouble. I'm there to try to help you. So, you know, we try to get people in. We have a patient-physician confidentiality laws that go along with it. So I can't just call police and say, hey, why don't you do a drug screen on this guy, leaving, you know, he's got track marks on his hands. That's not the point. So patients typically are, they're usually not up front, so it's always a challenge of trying to actually figure out who is actually using, which can be a challenge. I'll let the other doctors talk a little bit about the OB and pediatric problems as well, but that's about all the data that I had to share with you this evening. So.
Dr. Dennis?
Yes, thank you. I have to use that.
You can go right there. Yeah, there for you. Just a moment here.
All right. Can I talk in here?
Yep, nice and forward.
Okay. Hello, my name is, can you hear me? My name is Sarah Dennis. First, I'd like to just take a couple of my colleagues that are here tonight as well, Dr. Mary Schultz from obstetrics, Dr. Heller from psychiatry. So thank you guys for coming. I'm going to talk about heroin, opioids, and pregnancy tonight. This one. So rarely does drug use start during pregnancy. So most of the addicts that come to us are addicts before they're pregnant or are using drugs. And the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, 5% of pregnant women admitted illicit drug use in the last 30 days. And the neonatal abstinence syndrome, which Dr. Dono is going to talk about in a little bit, which is fetal withdrawal from opioids, has increased about 300% in the last 10 years. So this is a huge problem for pregnancy and for infants. In Fond du Lac County, we are seeing this problem. Every one of the obstetricians that we take care of pregnant people, we are taking care of these patients. They are in our clinics, they're delivering in our hospital. We have approximately 80 deliveries per month at St. Agnes Hospital and 1 to 2 infants per month with the neonatal abstinence syndrome, which is about 1 to 2% of our pregnant population. The infants, which Dr. Dono will talk about a little more, stay anywhere from 5 to 7 days up to 8 weeks. It's a huge expense. And most of the time we're aware these infants are coming, so we're taking care of the moms during the pregnancy. We know they're on these medications, and we can prepare for that ahead of time. However, sometimes we diagnose the mother's opioid use after the baby's born, because then we see neonatal withdrawal, and then we know what has been going on, and the mother hasn't admitted to us. Pregnancy may also be the point of entry into the healthcare system. So a lot of people don't have access to health care, don't have health insurance, but pregnant women always have health insurance, and they always are in the healthcare system. So we have a chance to intervene during pregnancy. In pregnancy, once addict or user uses heroin, it enters the fetal blood within 60 minutes. Oftentimes we see high-risk maternal behaviors too, so trading sex for drugs. It's very common. We see high rates of STDs. We always screen for hepatitis, HIV. If heroin use is untreated in pregnancy, the fetal loss, and this is a little bit controversial in studies, is about 10 to 20%. And we see poor nutrition, we see fetal growth restriction, and they don't show up for their appointments. Oftentimes when I have a user of opioids, I know when they've relapsed. They are late for their appointments, they don't show up. We call them, but we're there, we want them to come back. So the image of a drug-dependent pregnant woman determined to stop using drugs for her baby's sake is a compelling one. However, pregnant women should not stop the use of opioids. Okay, so that's one big message I wanted to bring tonight. Pregnant women should not withdraw from opioids during the pregnancy. So unlike what Dr. Larson said, for any adult that's withdrawing, it's not life-threatening, but it is during pregnancy. So that's why this is a very important population. Opioid withdrawal during pregnancy can cause miscarriage, preterm birth, meconium, stillbirth, elevated epinephrine levels. So we always are trying to have our pregnant patients on maintenance, we call it, and that's with methadone, used to be the standard of care, and now we're having great rates of success with Subutex, which is buprenorphine without the naloxone, and now more and more we're using the Suboxone, which is the buprenorphine plus naloxone. In Fond du Lac County, opioid maintenance can be initiated within like 24 to 48 hours if you present to the OB clinic. If I have a patient show up in my office and they tell me they're using heroin, we work very closely with our addiction medicine, and I can get them into treatment within 24 hours. It's very important that they tell me they're using and that we can get this started right away for the benefit of them and the infant. Pregnant women need higher doses of opiates too. They metabolize it much higher, and they also need like double dosing, so like a dose in the morning, a dose at night, where some adults only need 1 dose a day of medications. And incarcerated women need to continue on their opioid treatment. So that's one message I have too for law enforcement, that when they're in jail, they're in prison, they need to continue on the opioid treatment. Treatment is associated with higher birth weights, better compliance, decreased relapse, decreased risk of death. And so for an overview, we want to focus on treatment and care. We continue prenatal care even when our patients relapse. We want them to come back. We will always take care of them no matter what they're doing, but we need them to continue with their prenatal care. We want to be non-judgmental, honest, and caring. We want them to help face the realities of what they're doing as well. And we have the resources to do that here in Fond du Lac County. And we work very closely with the social agencies, addiction medicine, pediatrics. And the Wisconsin Maternal and Child Health Hotline, I just want to put that number out there. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and pregnant women can call this number anytime for immediate assistance. All right, I'll hand it over to Dr. Dono, who's going to talk about our precious neonates.
Good evening. I want to spend a few minutes talking about what we do with the newborn babies in our nursery that are born affected or potentially affected by heroin and other drugs. And first, as a pediatrician, I want to plug public health and prevention. On the bottom of this slide, talking about examples how it works with the neonatal abstinence syndrome. Number one, if we wanted to prevent this from happening at all, we'd prevent the addiction from occurring. A lot of times we're spending time in the lower right-hand corner here. We're treating addicted patients. We're treating the babies with a neonatal abstinence syndrome. But we know as a goal, as a community, we want to try to move ourselves to the secondary level and the primary level of prevention for these problems. This is, go back to the history of heroin. That's when it was for sale. What is neonatal abstinence syndrome? It's a withdrawal syndrome experienced by newborns sometime after birth, usually in the first 24 hours to 4 to 5 days. Usually we're talking about the opiate exposure, but other medications are involved, including alcohol, benzodiazepines, barbiturates. Alcohol is included, and tobacco is included. Some babies may have only been exposed to their mother smoking a lot during their pregnancy, and they also can exhibit symptoms. But with specifically talking about the heroin and methadone exposed babies, estimates run from 60 to 80% of those babies will experience the abstinence syndrome. and it depends on the type of drug they're exposed to, other substances mother may have taken, the timing of when mother took those substances, how well the baby metabolized it, and also how long the pregnancy proceeds. Sometimes actually premature babies are a little bit less affected than full-term babies. After a baby's born, heroin can manifest problems within 24 to 48 hours. Methadone is typically talked about as being between 24 to 72 hours. The Subutex that many of our patients are now on, approximately 40 hours, but certainly our convention now is to watch these babies for 4 to 5 days after birth. The diagnosis of neonatal abstinence syndrome is not made by doing a drug screen on the baby immediately. That can be helpful if we know what we're looking for. It can be helpful if the mother shares with us her history or if we know the mother's in treatment. But we don't get a meconium drug screen back for several days. And a urine drug screen isn't particularly useful in newborn babies. Not every exposed baby is going to go through withdrawal, as we mentioned. And the dose that the mother took during her pregnancy, whether it's illicit drug or treatment doses of methadone, for example, does not necessarily correlate with the degree or the length of the abstinence syndrome for the newborn. So what we use is a scoring system. This is a busy slide, but it talks about what we're looking for. We're looking for a high-pitched cry. We're looking for continuous crying. We're looking at poor sleeping habits, hyperactive reflexes, tremors, being very jittery. At an extreme example, having seizures. We're looking at a newborn baby sweating, having elevated temperatures, yawning a lot, having a stuffy nose, having increased respiratory rate. They'll chew and gnash on their fingers like they're hungry all the time. They can have abnormal stools. They can have disorganized feeding, we call it, where they just can't suck on a bottle or they can't nurse with mom. So we keep track of this, and that's how we monitor the babies and decide if they need treatment. This is old-fashioned treatment. This was the tincture of opium. This was actually sold in the 1830s. They had a dose on this bottle for 5-day-old infants, 5 drops. They'd give it to calm down their babies. But we use something similar to that now for our babies. This is one of my favorite books. Talks about the irreducible needs of children. And I'd like to encourage folks to think about how they might list those needs. The authors of this book describe several factors they think are relevant, and I think one of which talks about nurturing relationships with their family and community, physical protection and safety, the need for experiences tailored to their differences. And with reference to this, there's needs for limit setting, for structure, for the community support. So when you see the babies, think about them. They're funny, they're loving, they'll react to you, what you do to them, and I thank you.
Todd Jankwart is our next speaker, and he is the Assistant Chief of EMS for the Fond du Lac Fire Department. He's been in the field for 20 years, I think, and he's been employed in the city of Fond du Lac since 1997. And as Todd will tell you, the fire department, the EMS has been responding to a lot of calls regarding drug overdoses. So here's Todd Jankwart.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to step out front here a little bit. I'm truly amazed at the presence tonight. This is really impressive. It's a great community outreach to get all this information and realize what sort of threats we have in our community here. So my goal here is to talk to you a little bit about how we see things out in the field, talk a little bit about some statistics here on Narcan, which Dr. Larson had alluded to, what they use in the ER. We also use that out in the field. So that's my goal here tonight, talk a little bit also about some pending legislation and efforts nationwide on implementing Narcan and making it more available for other responders and lay people. So I'm going to try to be brief here. I'm going to try to kind of speed things up. I got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to accelerate things a little bit. So basically, we talked a little bit about Narcan. Narcan is a reversal agent. It's really used specifically for narcotic overdose. So not just heroin, but also oxycodone, Percocet, codeine, et cetera. So we're going to talk about some of the data we collected here as far as all of our responses. Our data goes back to January 1st of 2006. We've collected this data all the way up to March 10th, 2014. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the total times that we have administered Narcan in the field. We're also going to talk about the number of overdoses, which not only includes narcotic overdoses, but also any other medication. We're going to break down those overdoses into two categories. One, which is life-threatening overdoses. This is characterized by an individual who's either unresponsive, has a respiratory difficulty or a respiratory arrest, cardiac arrest, ineffective breathing, cyanosis, which is that blue color that you see around the lips, around the fingertips, or centrally into the face. And then hypoxia, which is a term which is coined by when we see a low O2 saturation or oxygen percentage based on our equipment. We're also going to break down overdoses into non-life-threatening overdoses. Those are characterized typically by confusion, an altered level of consciousness, somebody who has difficulty communicating, somebody who's generally confused. Now, we break down non-life-threatening overdoses into two additional categories where a patient condition was improved by the use of Narcan or a patient condition remains unchanged. We can really tell if you give somebody Narcan and all of a sudden they were completely unresponsive or altered, and then shortly after you give the dose, they're conscious, alert, oriented, well, you can suspect that they had narcotics in their system, and we use Narcan to reverse the effects. On the other side, if we've given them Narcan and they still remain unconscious, unresponsive, we can generally guess that there's not a certain amount of narcotics in the system, or we haven't given enough Narcan. So we'll start out with some of the numbers here. Our total numbers for Narcan administration, to draw your attention to 2006, we gave it 18 times in 2006. Now I'll draw your attention to 2014. We've given it 27 times from January 1st till March 10th. So we've given it more, basically, in a little over 2 months than we did altogether in the year of 2006. In 2013, we had 79. If we maintain the pace that we're on, we're going to blow 2013 out of the water for Narcan administrations. Now, as far as total overdoses, these are patients who've shown signs of an overdose, whether they're completely altered, unresponsive, any of the life-threatening or non-life-threatening categories. In 2006, we treated 3 overdoses. Now, just to bring it back a little bit, we give Narcan for 2 primary reasons. One reason is because it's an obvious drug overdose. The second reason is because they're unresponsive or they're altered, but we don't know why. So we're going to give it as a placebo, not a placebo, but we're just going to give it to see if it has any effect. So these are total overdoses. So these are patients that we've recognized have an overdose. We've given Narcan. In 2013, we've given it 37 times. So far in 2014, we've had 15 overdoses that we've treated with Narcan. Now we talk about life-threatening overdoses. These are patients who are cyanotic, they're blue, they're unresponsive. These people are going to die. If we do not breathe for them, if we do not take over, if we do not give them oxygen and bag them, or reverse the effects of whatever medication they have in their system, specifically a narcotic, they will die. 2013, we had 13 of them. 2006, we had 0. 2014, again, a little over 2 months, we've had 10. Non-life-threatening overdoses. Now, the categories, we have, the first one is basically the one where it's, I have to go back there. I'll tell you what, we're going to save this time. We're going to skip over this one because the data is a little bit confusing. So let's go to overdose deaths. 2012, we had 1 death that was related to an overdose. Now, these are overdoses where we've made an attempt to treat these patients with Narcan. These are not overall overdoses, because there's many cases where we can't track down the overdose. We don't treat them with Narcan because we get there and they're deceased already. So we've made an attempt to resuscitate them. In 2012, we tried with Narcan, we were unsuccessful. 2013, we had 4 overdoses that died that we were unsuccessful in resuscitating. I know for a fact, after going through the data, that those 2013 numbers, 3 of those were due to heroin. 2014, so far, we're winning. We've got 0. Hopefully we stay on that pace for the rest of the year. Hopefully we see everything else go down also. To break that down a little bit, 2013 overdoses by drug, 23 of those overdoses were an unknown drug, unknown medication. We're unable to gather that information. 11 of those overdoses were heroin, 2 were hydrocodone, and 1 was oxycodone. So when we talk about the deaths, how we gather that information, how do we know it was heroin? I'm sure there's deaths out there that we weren't aware of. It could have been a heroin overdose. But in these situations where we made an attempt to treat them with Narcan, we were unsuccessful. We either had evidence on scene by either the materials right there, or bystanders, or a family, some witness who confirms, yes, this individual was using heroin. And then in one instance, we weren't sure. We knew it was a medication overdose of some sort, and we suspected narcotic, but we couldn't confirm it, so we listed it as unknown. Now, talking about our issues when we give Narcan, some very common issues, and our personnel learn very quickly. We have paramedics who come right out of school, and right away, oh, we got an overdose. We're going to give them the maximum amount of Narcan. People get very combative. People get very violent when they come out. They're completely unresponsive. They come to, they don't know what's going on. They lash out. There's 2 things going on. Obviously, they're confused, but not only that, they're angry. You just took them from a very, very happy place, even though they're not aware they're dying, to being, whoa, I'm sober again, especially if these individuals are addicted. We can put them basically into withdrawal. So automatically, not only do we see the behavioral issues, the psychological issues, but we also see medical changes. They vomit. It happens very, very frequently. As soon as you give Narcan, if you've given too much, they vomit. They also show signs of withdrawal, especially with the hardcore users of narcotics. What can happen also is that some of our more experienced personnel, they'll start out with a lower dose of Narcan so that we get the respiratory effort back, but we don't want to wake them up completely because, you know, why poke the bear to see if it has claws, right? So what we do is really give them a smaller amount of doses so we get that respiratory drive back, give them oxygen, try to kind of get them to that nice happy place, but keep them from getting violent, keep them from going into withdrawal, and get them in. But what happens sometimes is we don't give them enough. So if we don't monitor them, you know, sooner or later the half-life of Narcan wears off, and all of a sudden the amount of narcotic they have in their system takes over again, and they go back under. So I'm going to wrap it up here, but just to talk about some of the state bill very, very briefly. There's advantages here. It's good that law enforcement, it's good that lay people may be able to use Narcan, but understand that it comes with a price. It is not a magic bullet. It is not an antidote, so to speak. It has issues. There are things that happen. It does take trained personnel, and at the same time, when a Narcan is administered, EMS and law enforcement should be still contacted so they can come and take care of any other additional issues. So that'll be it, and I guess we'll answer questions when we're all done, but thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody's support.
Fond du Lac County's Birth to 3 program for more than 2 decades. She has a master's degree in early intervention of at-risk infants from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and she supervises 4 child development specialists, oversees contracts with providers for specialized services such as speech, occupational, and physical therapy for young children. This program serves about 100 children and families at any given time. And as we've heard, the police department cracking down on these heroin cases and the district attorney's office prosecuting these cases, the Department of Social Services also working hard to make sure that children of the drug addicts are not forgotten. Erica Winterfelt and Kay Meddy Reinhardt co-supervise the initial assessment and access unit at Social Services. And so our next presenters, Diane Fett, the Birth to 3 Program Director, Kay Reinhardt and Erica Winterfelt with the Department of Social Services. Diane?
Thank you. We're going to kind of split this up just a little. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. This epidemic has its eye on our young people, and they are of childbearing years. My name is Diane Fett. I am the director of Fond du Lac County's Birth to 3 program, and our program provides early intervention services to young children with developmental concerns. Our role is to assess development, monitor it, and then provide intervention to children and families who are eligible. And I have to say that I am worried about our babies. Unfortunately, like many agencies in Fond du Lac County, we have seen a marked increase in the number of referrals of drug-exposed babies. In 2013, the Birth to 3 program received a total of 17 referrals of children whose families were impacted by drug use. And I know that the Fond du Lac County Maternal Child Health Unit has shared that it has already received 4 referrals of infants identified with substance exposure this year alone from St. Agnes Hospital. So all told, about 10% of our referrals are for substance-exposed children for both Birth to 3 and almost 10% for the Maternal Child Health Department. But I have to say, one baby is too many, one child is too many. And as Dr. Sarah Dennis and Dr. Dono had already told you, whether pregnant mothers are actively using or receiving treatment, babies in utero are too. Babies are literally held captive, and they're exposed to all of the substances their mothers ingest. Currently, there are only 20 states which routinely screen infants for substances. Wisconsin is not one of them. We really have no idea how many babies are affected. We're not tracking this data. We need baseline data before we can even begin to understand the scope of this problem. If there is a legislator here, and I know that there is, please take note. Wisconsin needs to screen all infants for substances. Like we've heard from law enforcement, today's heroin is often cut with unknown additives. We have no way of knowing or studying the long-term consequences of prenatal drug exposure on children. I'm really worried about that. Today we know the science is clear that early experiences in infancy and early childhood have lifelong and profound impact on health and well-being. Everyday interactions and experiences in infancy and childhood greatly influence the architecture of developing brains. Unlike other organs in the body, and think about this, this is really important, the brain does not come fully developed at birth. The brain arrives with most of its cells and neurons, but important connections between the cells are made during infancy and early childhood. All babies need consistent, responsive, and nurturing relationships to foster their emotional and physical well-being. It lays the foundation for the child's future. And I don't know if I had a slide up, if you could help, please. There's something that we know today called adverse childhood experiences. They're known as ACEs. ACEs produce toxic stress in children. Adverse experiences are defined as, if we could go to this slide right here.
This one?
Yep. As recurrent physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. It is having an alcohol or drug abuser in the household, an incarcerated household member, someone who is chronically depressed, mentally ill, institutionalized, or suicidal, witnessing violence between adults in the home, parental separation, loss, or divorce. Now think about this. Many of these events go hand in hand with addiction. Research shows a clear understanding between the number of ACEs that a person experiences as a child and future health outcomes as an adult, and can even predict whether or not a person will engage in injected drug use, develop chronic bronchitis and emphysema, become an adult alcoholic, or attempt suicide. I'm hoping that all of you are having an aha moment to make the connection here between experiences, especially early experiences and outcomes. Parents facing addiction need treatment and support to assure their capacity to consistently and responsibly meet the needs of their children, to be present for them, and most importantly, to reduce the exposure of adverse experiences and the chances of their children repeating the cycle of addiction. I want to show you something right now. I think it's really important. It's about 2 minutes long, but it's really powerful. This is out of the 0 to 3 in the University of Massachusetts. They've produced a short clip which really brings the message home. It's called the Still Face Experiment. As you watch the clip, I want you to imagine the parent high on heroin or exhausted after the high, unable to be responsive to their child and without hope. I want you to imagine the child whose cries are unheard, and imagine the child and the parent and all the uncertainty and all of the damage that addiction brings with it. The Still Face Experiment.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
The best thing that a mother can do for her child is to recover. And I think there's so many resources in our community that can help with that. I work hand in hand with the Department of Social Services and Child Welfare. They're required through the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act to refer any child substantiated to have been abused or neglected to the Birth to 3 program, and we realize that these are our most vulnerable children, and we are truly committed to do all that we can to assure that they grow up with nurturing and responsive relationships. And now my colleagues, Kay and Erica, also.
All right, well, thank you for coming tonight and supporting such an important initiative to combat what you're hearing is a very significant problem here in the community of Fond du Lac. As Greg has mentioned, we are initial assessment and access unit supervisors at the Department of Social Services here in Fond du Lac. Our unit is responsible for taking in all of the calls of reported abuse and neglect, including unborn child abuse for the county. We are charged with the responsibility of determining if we need to intervene in the reported situation and how quickly we need to respond. At that time, one of our 10 initial assessment social workers is assigned to the case to go into the community, conduct the required interviews, and make decisions about child safety and service needs for families. Issues of alcohol and drug abuse are not foreign to Child Protective Services work. However, in the last 2.5 years, the majority of our cases indicates that one or more of the parents are abusing opiates and or heroin. In the beginning, we were naive to how bad this problem really was, and we felt ill-equipped to combat the effects of this drug on families. It wasn't long before we recognized that this was a trend that was not quick to pass, and that we would have to become experts very quickly on the effects of opiates and heroin on our children and families. We invite you to watch a short clip here.
Right now, I'm addicted to heroin. I'll do pills if I have them. I prefer pills, but heroin's a lot cheaper. I've smoked crack every once in a while. There's no way I could stop using heroin if I wanted to. I think with how much I do and how long I've been doing it for, I think I would die from withdrawal. Well, it's just like a daily medicine, just to feel normal. Would you let me borrow $5? Well, I need $5 for what I need it for. Okay, I'm only asking for $5. All right, let's go. We're talking about getting 2 balloons, which is 50 to 30 cc's of heroin. Listen, just look for a game to play, honey. What are you doing? Tar. I'm puddling it right now, and then I put a piece of a cotton in it. No, we don't really use it at the same time. She can't do it. I can't hit myself or her, so she's gonna hit me. Good healthcare. Hold on, Alyssa! And you gotta wait and see, like, you pull it up like that, and then if it fills up, that means you've hit a vein. You gotta hurry up. Do that. Just hurry up. Undo it! She can't hit a vein. There you go. Till it's filling up. Come on, I'm losing all feeling in my arm. Okay, I've let go. Oh my god, it's burning all through my freaking arm. See the white marks? Down here, it's going up down there. She can see it. I have a red loop. Right, you see it right there. Every time you're doing it, you're taking a chance of overdose. Yeah. I've overdosed. Or at the point where we just don't really care. But yeah, I mean, it terrifies us. But I mean, after so many times of doing it. How are you feeling? I feel good. Are you gonna be loud? Look. I see. It's crazy. It's never happened to me. That's the worst it's ever been.
I'm hungry. I'm hungry.
It's been about 15 minutes since I shot up heroin, tar. I feel good. I feel really good, but at the same time, I just feel like I'm a horrible mom. Sorry. I feel like I'm not good enough for anybody. Not even for myself sometimes, or for him. And Brooke, I just feel like I'm dragging her down with me.
That's a hard clip to watch. We have watched it several times, and still, after seeing it for the multiple time, we still are almost brought to tears every time. This is the reality of what we do every day in working with the families who are addicted to heroin. So over time, we had to ask ourselves the following questions. How are these drugs different than what we've typically seen in the past? Why are people so dependent on them? Why aren't people responding to treatment? And what is it about these drugs that make the parents seem to forget about the needs of their children and make obtaining the drug a higher priority. We quickly found out that opiates and heroin are in a class of their own, and we had to make changes in the way we did our business when working with families. Initially, the prescription pills were the primary concern. We were seeing more and more parents abusing their prescription medications, which were very easy to obtain and trade amongst other abusers. We noticed that opiate addiction did not discriminate. It broke the boundaries of race, class, and gender. Another offshoot of this epidemic, as we've heard from some of our colleagues today, is pregnant mothers who are addicted to opiates and heroin, thus giving birth to drug-affected infants. There has been an astounding number of these reports, which pose an even greater challenge because the unborn child, as Diane mentioned, is the most vulnerable when in utero. They are incapacitated to do anything to avoid the effects of these substances to their growth and development. There's a barrier to understanding and fully addressing unborn child abuse in that there is not enough long-term research to assist us in knowing the long-term effects to child development.
So fast forward 2.5 years later, we no longer go through a workday where we aren't mentioning the word heroin multiple times a day. We no longer feel like we can just be social workers trying to help people. We have to be detectives trying to catch people in their lies and addiction to make sure the most innocent victims of heroin are safe and getting their needs met. Our social workers are entering homes of the unknown. When we have a tip that parents in the home could be using, buying, selling, and associating with dangerous, addicted criminals, as we've heard from our law enforcement professionals here tonight. In order to help the addicted parent, we must first prove their addiction, and we must get them to understand how their addiction is impacting their children and putting their safety in jeopardy. For some parents, this is really the aha moment. It's a turning point, and for sadly others, it's not. There's no comfort sending social workers into these environments. However, this is the price we are willing to pay to become the voice of the children who have no voice.
And we would like to take a minute to recognize that we do have several of our staff in the audience, and we want to applaud them for the work they do every single day. Children who live in homes where heroin is used and or distributed are at greater risk for every type of abuse there is: physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect. Heroin-addicted parents are consumed each and every day with how they get the heroin and getting high. How does all of this affect kids? Why is heroin addiction a community concern? The following are examples of a child's perspective as a result of their parents' opiate or heroin addiction.
Why do I have to miss school to take care of my brothers and sisters again?
Why won't my parents pay attention to me?
Why is my mom locked in the bathroom all the time?
I just want my mom back.
Is something wrong with my dad? Why does he always need a shot?
Mom, I'm hungry. Why don't we have any food?
Why can't we just be a normal family?
I got in trouble again at school for falling asleep.
Mom's in jail again. Guess she'll miss another birthday.
Why is my dad sick all the time?
Why won't my parents tell me the truth?
Don't my parents love me enough to quit?
I'm scared.
Why can't I wake up my mom?
I'm so worried I feel like I can't think straight at school.
Why are we moving again?
I'm so embarrassed.
What did I do wrong?
Why are all these people in my house all the time?
Mommy, don't you hear my cries? I just want you to hold me.
Help me.
What you have heard today can do no justice to explain the depth and complexity of this problem. We look into the faces of addicted parents who want nothing more than to be free of this demon, heroin. Looking into the eyes of a child that has been adversely affected by addicted parents is unimaginable.
You cannot understand the sorrow that we feel ripping children out of the arms of their parents because they're addicts. But we must, because heroin is so powerful. We urge everyone here tonight to take a stand with us and spread the word about heroin and its impact on children and families. The message needs to be clear. We won't tolerate children being the innocent victims of this drug in Fond du Lac anymore. Thank you.
Thank you.
They are. Doug Darby and Anthony Alvarado are going to speak here in just a moment, but they were on my talk show last Friday. Unbelievable story that you're about to hear. These are two recovering heroin addicts. Doug told me he died 3 times and was brought back to life with Narcan. And was convinced and had actually made peace with himself that he was going to die at age 30. He, as a heroin addict, as you've heard from law enforcement, they'll do anything to get heroin, and Doug did just about anything to get heroin. Robbery, spent time in prison. Anthony grew up in Ripon, is that right?
That's right.
And you got high about a block away from the radio station here in Fond du Lac. And both of these young men, they rode their heroin addiction, as you're going to hear, to rock bottom before they were able to summon the courage to seek help. And they are doing some really wonderful things today. They've turned their lives around, and they're turning other lives around, making up for the mistakes they've made in the past. They've formed a support and education group called Rise Together. Doug Darby, Anthony Alvarado.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It truly is amazing to be here tonight. What Rise Together is myself, Anthony, we're the co-founders of it. And what we do is we try to bring prevention, awareness, and education to today's youth. We truly believe that the only way that we're going to stop this problem, and I say stop in a light term, but curb this problem into the forefronts of what we hope to see it, is to attack today's youth, to have them never follow in the footsteps that we followed in. Because this is more than just addiction. This is dealing with life on life's terms. The teenagers that we're seeing and coming in contact with daily, they're dealt with stresses and problems that even I myself don't understand. And the message we're trying to get across is life is hard. We understand that. We know that. And we're here to say that someone is out there that cares. I'm going to tell you a story tonight. Anthony is going to share his. And they're quite different in background, yet leading to overall the same fact of the matter of where we ended up in our addiction. I myself was introduced to heroin at a very young age. My father was in my house, going in, putting the fear of God into that poor pharmacist, and demanding OxyContin. I went home, got high, and the next day I turn on the news, and there I am, plain-faced. And what you need to understand, this wasn't my first time in trouble. 2007, I was raided by the Drug Task Force, caught with 2 pounds of marijuana, so I was already on probation. I'd already gotten my slap on the wrist, but I still didn't have a problem. And as I watched myself on the news, plain-faced, knowing that, yeah, I'm going to prison, continued to get high, and for 5 days I repeated that over and over and over. And on the 5th day, I was out of pills again. What did I do? I went and robbed another pharmacy. You see, I was a junkie. I wasn't an idiot. I knew by this time that there was a problem, but I was so broken in my addiction that it didn't matter. Because like Greg just said, 30, I resided the fact that I would probably die by 27. And that was the fact of it. Because in my own heart of hearts, sobriety was going to be worse because I had dealt with addiction for over 8 years of this substance, heroin. On September 9th, 2010, the SWAT team raided my house and I was arrested. I went to Brown County Jail. And on September 10th, I walked out that morning, walked into the shower area. I took the pants off my legs, wrapped them around my own neck, and strung them up in the shower. The only reason why I'm standing here today and telling you my story is because of a younger brother that I have. His name's Andrew. He's 10 years younger than me. So if you do the math, robbed the pharmacy on the 10-year anniversary. Well, on my freshman year of high school, these kids. This takes a community and statewide effort if we're ever going to fight this. You hear those numbers? Those aren't jokes. Because Anthony and I have buried 11 friends in the last 7 years, some family member. That's 11 mothers I've seen pulled from those caskets. Should have been my mom. This has to stop. And we need your help on every facet of this. Because it's not just the homeless guy getting high under the bridge anymore. This isn't about sex or age or race or social background. Life is hard. And these kids aren't knowing how to deal with the life on life's terms. I didn't know how to deal with it. I don't want to see that anymore. We need you. We can't do this alone. And all I can say is we're just a couple of junkies trying to do our best. Thank you.
All right, we brought some life back to the crowd. That's awesome. These guys did amazing, though. Thank you so much for inviting us here. It means the world to us. You know, I did go to school in Ripon, kind of from Fond du Lac County, so to come home, be here, be alive, be well, have friends here. People have come all over the state, so we just want to do a shout out. People came from Milwaukee, Appleton, Green Bay, Madison. Thank you so much for traveling all this way. It means the world to us. What we're out there doing, we're passionate about because it is a problem. The numbers that were shared here today, you should know that tells the truth. We're all here for a reason. We're here to rise together, like I would like to say, and make a difference. But we can't do it unless we take action. And part of our action here at Rise Together is telling our story, because we're providing hope to the still suffering addict. Doug told me, or told you guys, just a little bit ago, that we have completely different backgrounds, but yet we ended up going down the same path. About 15 years ago, at the age of 14, I started using drugs. In just 3 short years, from the age of 14 to 17, my life was already out of control. I was already a deadbeat student, working a dead-end job, strapped with a full-time habit. And it was harming way more than just myself. And over the next 6 years, from age 17 to age 24, when I thought life couldn't get worse, it did. It got much worse. But at that time that I started, and throughout those years, I didn't understand it was going to take me down that path. Most addicts don't. It seems to start out innocent, but we are blind. I didn't understand that my addiction would take everything that I cared about. Everything. My dreams, my aspirations, my sanity, my freedom, my voice. It ruined me spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally. Everything we thrive on as people, it tore from me. It ripped from my heart. Friends, family, children, my own kids. My addiction helped me lose my wife. My addiction almost took my life. You see, I was introduced to drugs way before the age of 14. You see, my parents are addicts. They still struggle to this day. Some of you in this room might even know them. But what I do know is when I was young, I didn't have the education. I didn't have the awareness. I didn't know how to make sense out of alcohol and drugs, the things that were going on at home. I didn't understand how alcohol and drugs were tearing my family apart. I didn't understand when I got home that they weren't there and why. I didn't understand the fights, the screaming, the yelling, the beatings that were happening at home because of alcohol and drugs. So how am I supposed to know that I too could become that? How am I supposed to know that I too could become an addict and that my life could turn out like their life? That everything would be taken from me like it was from them? How am I supposed to know? Ripon, Wisconsin, you know it's small. This was 11 years ago. Services there, they were there. That's the thing that most people don't understand. When you're in that lifestyle, you're scared, you're frightened. And to ask for help, shit, most people in this room won't even ask for help when they need it. Especially a scared child at home. So when I started drinking, I didn't think it was a big deal. When I started using marijuana, I didn't think it was a big deal. When the warning signs came up, I didn't pay attention. When grades started to drop, didn't think it was a big deal. When I started to get in trouble, I didn't think that was a big deal. Detention, didn't think it was a big deal. When the cops chased me down the hallway, I didn't think it was a big deal. When I had the handcuffs on, time and time again, I didn't care. Because by that time, I was lost. Throughout those 10 years of my life, it was tragedy and horror. I remember one of the last times that I used drugs. I remember like it was yesterday. I was about 24 years old, almost 7 years ago now. And I was at the end of my rope. I was done. I was tired, I was broken. I was ashamed of who I became. I was trying to kill myself. I was consuming as many drugs as I possibly could so I could end the pain, so I can make it stop. And after numerous times of trying to do this and failing, and yet looking at that as another failure in my life, after overdosing 3 times that summer, I had enough. And I'm sitting there on the back porch of my grandmother's house, smoking my cigarette, probably the last one I have left. And I'm ashamed. I'm looking down at the ground. I have my head in my hands, and I don't know what to do. I don't even know where to begin to make up for the mistakes that I made. And out of the corner of my eyes, I see this little boy right here. He was 3 years old at the time. And you know when you see a 3-year-old, they're so happy. They have smiles and they're full of energy. And they come running to their father with joy, with their arms open. But with me, with that little boy over there, there was no smile. Okay? Just plain face. I couldn't even look him in his eyes. But that little boy did something that changed my life forever. That little boy came up to me because I wouldn't look at him, because I wasn't a big enough man to face him at 3 years old. He came to me. He put his hands on my face. He squeezed my cheeks. Those nails dug into my face. And he said, "Dad, don't die. I love you. Don't die." And as I brought him close and I had him in my arms, I held on to him, something clicked. I got it. He was the changing factor, the tipping point in my life, something that I never even looked at. He was there for those 3 years, and I never even saw him. I did everything that my parents did to me to him, because that's what addiction does. It tears you apart and makes you blind. So throughout the last 7 years, I've worked my ass off to be where I'm at today. I've been through rehab 3 times. I'm not perfect. I'm no angel. But I'm working. I reach out. I take classes. I call my friends. I'm honest. And you know what? I feel better today than I've in a long time. I broke the cycle of addiction, and this little man right here, you can come up here. broke the cycle addiction in my family so my kids wouldn't have to go through what I did. I made a difference in their lives so they wouldn't have to see the things that I did, so they wouldn't have to make the choices. And this little boy makes me feel so happy. I don't know if you want to go to the other picture too. I also have, I know Darby wants to steal the show.
Time that got off there.
There's my two little kids. Gavin is now 10, so that was 7 years ago. He's going on 11. Jada, she's right there. She's my daughter. And those are my rocks. Those are my go-tos, right? These kids right here mean the world to me. And just to be there for them is amazing in itself. You can sit back now. But you see, when you're wrapped up in that lifestyle, you don't see anything that's possible. You don't see those things in front of you, those things that are important, the things that we all strive on. And I'm here standing today as living proof that we can recover, that we can stand up, that we can turn our lives around. But we can't do it without you. But it starts with one voice. And here at Rise Together, we're making a difference because we're going in front of those kids and telling this story so they don't go down the same path that we did. So as I stand here today and I raise my fists in the air, let's all rise together and make a difference in this community. Thank you so much.
Bridget Henschel has a really busy week. She drove up to Fond du Lac the other day to be on my news program. She's here this evening to speak to you about how heroin addiction has affected her family. And she also is attending a federal trial for the person who's charged with her daughter's death. It was 2 years ago when Bridget's daughter Amalia died from a heroin overdose. And as you are going to hear from Bridget, time, it seems like only yesterday, and it hasn't healed the pain for her. But she's here today to spread her word and to let you know about the dangers of heroin and just how quickly, in a split second, it can devastate lives. Bridget?
Hello. I'm glad you're all here. Let me start out by telling you why I am here. I am here so that hopefully, by listening to everyone talk tonight, every person here will realize that heroin and heroin addiction has become a deadly epidemic in central Wisconsin. And something has to be done right away, or some of you will have the story
that sounds tragically familiar to mine someday. Now let me tell you who I am and who this beautiful girl on the screen is. My name is Bridget Henschel, and this beautiful girl on the screen is my daughter, Amalia Henschel. Before I get started with telling you her story, I just want you to all know that I brought her here with me tonight. I brought her here with me because I know for absolute sure that she wants me to tell her story and hopefully bring awareness to this growing epidemic and also hopefully prevent another family from going through what our family has gone through. The worst day of our lives happened April 12th, 2012. At the age of 21, our beautiful, full of life daughter, Amalia Jean Henschel, passed away tragically, unexpectedly, and at the very beginning of her adult life. The cause of death? Heroin. My husband and I moved our family to Waushara County 16 years ago with a dream of raising our children in a small, quiet, and safe central Wisconsin community. At that time, Amalia was 8 years old and our only child. She was your typical 8-year-old little girl, just full of energy and enthusiasm. She played softball in the summer and basketball in the winter. She had lots of friends, and they were always doing sleepovers at each other's houses, playing dress up, and it sure seemed like there was a birthday party every other weekend. She was on the traveling basketball team all the way up till high school. And they played almost every weekend from December to April. Amalia had lots of friends, but she was best friends with her teammates, and they had a lot of fun playing sports together and just hanging out. Amalia was really quite popular and turned into a very beautiful young lady as she got to high school. Her freshman and sophomore years, she played volleyball, basketball, and softball. She always had good grades, and she was still best friends with all her teammates. She was your typical all-American girl that everybody would be proud of to have as their daughter. Things started to change a little bit between her sophomore and junior years of high school, though. She stopped playing sports and started to hang around with some different friends. They also seemed like good friends, and even though she kind of lost interest in her sports, she developed a love for music and writing poems and photography. She also continued to have good grades. So we thought everything was fine and that she was just going through the teenage hormonal thing or trying to find her way. Her senior year in high school, she attended UW Fox Valley for part of each school day and got a head start on college. by earning college credits while still in high school. The next year after high school, she attended college full-time and did some modeling during the summer for a sporting apparel catalog. Very typical all-American girl that every parent would be proud to have as a daughter, right? We thought so. After that first year of college, we noticed some more changes. She was really starting to have trouble getting motivated for her classes and everything else that had to do with her life, her future. We gave her the benefit of the doubt and just thought that she just might need a few years to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. She was over 18, and we were giving her some space to figure things out. Now we knew that she was doing some partying, and we expressed our concern. But at the same time, we just thought most young adults her age were doing a little partying. We knew. We did the same also. But what we didn't know was the type of partying they were doing. We started finding prescription painkillers on her, even though we knew she did not have a prescription. Oxycontin and Vicodin were the ones we usually found and we disposed of. We also started to find marijuana and marijuana pipes. When we were at her age, our partying consisted of a 12-pack of beer and a campfire. So we became very concerned and even a bit angry. At this time, we really started talking to her about getting her act together and pressing her pretty hard about straightening her life out. We offered to help her in any way we could, but she just blew us off. She said we were overreacting and said she didn't have any kind of problem. The problem persisted though, and we saw things getting worse over the next year or so, and we knew we had to do something. In the fall of 2011, my husband and I did an intervention when we thought Amalia had a prescription painkiller problem, and she couldn't fix it herself. Over the next 4 months, Amalia went through a 30-day treatment program in Oshkosh, followed by a 90-day program at the Beacon House here in Fond du Lac. We visited her every chance we could and attended all the family sessions. She had the full support of our family and a lot of support from grandparents and other extended family members. It was truly a team effort, and I know that she was almost overwhelmed by love and encouragement. She completed that 90-day program at the Beacon House at the end of January 2012. And from what we could see, it sure looked like she was a changed person, heading in the right direction at this point. We did understand from our family sessions that addiction is a disease and a very hard to overcome on the first or even second or third attempt. But it sure seemed that she was much better after our close observation. On the early evening of April 11th, she said she was going to hang around with one of her old girlfriends she hadn't seen in a while. We knew this friend, and we knew she would be all right for Amalia to be around. What we didn't know was that girlfriend was working till 11 p.m. and Amalia was planning to call a different so-called friend. that we didn't know. We also did not know that this was going to be the last time that we were going to be able to hug or tell her we love her again. Her plans to hang out with this other friend until her girlfriend had got done from work. This person gave her heroin at his house, according to the police report. And they went to a bar together in Red Granite. Not long after arriving at that bar, Amalia left that bar by herself and was found dead next to a porch located less than 100 yards from the rear entrance of that bar. This other so-called friend who gave her the heroin is currently facing federal charges for murder under the Limbias laws. April 12th, 2012. This is without a doubt the worst day of our lives. This is the day our beautiful daughter Amalia died because of a heroin at the age of 21. And this is also the day we were notified of her passing. You love your children more than anything in this world. They're a part of you, and they are part of you, and you love them more than life itself. When your child is born, you look forward to the day they take their first step, the day they say mommy or daddy for the first time, their first day of school, the day they graduate high school, the day they graduate college or start a career of their choice, the day they get married, the day they buy their first house, the day they start their family, the day you become a grandparent, the many days that they come to you for advice, for help. The days you watch their family grow. More than half of these so-called life's precious moments were taken away from us on April 12th, 2012. Our youngest daughter, Allison, was 3 years old when her big sister died almost 2 years ago. She still asks where her big sister Molly is. This just breaks our hearts. All over again, hearing her ask this and trying to explain so that a 5-year-old little girl might understand. Our son, Andrew, was 12 when his big sister died. The pain and shock in his face when we told him the news and the tears flowing down his cheeks are a picture in our minds that we will never forget. No parent should ever have to go through losing a child they love so dearly, and no parent should ever have to tell their other children that their big sister is dead and that they will never hug, see, kiss, or talk to them again. The loss of a child is so devastating and painful that it is impossible to fully explain in words. They say that time will heal all wounds and dull the pain. But I can honestly tell you And almost 2 years have passed since Amalia's death, and it still is as painful as the day we found out. The cause of death is what shocked us the most. We are a hardworking, middle-class family that up to this point would have never imagined that a drug like heroin could be found in our small central Wisconsin community. I am here as living proof that this doesn't just happen to movie stars or famous people in big cities. But this is a rapidly growing problem that is just getting worse. I don't know if my husband and I were just being naive or just not paying close attention to the newspapers and TV stations. But since the loss of our daughter, not a month goes by without hearing of another heroin-related death or a large drug bust related to heroin. Upon doing more research about heroin, we found out that heroin is really one of the only drugs that can and does kill people the very first time you use it. It is also the most addicting drugs, illegal drugs found on the streets. We have a very serious epidemic on our hands. Health department statistics that I have seen show that from the years 2000 to 2007, Wisconsin averaged 29 related heroin deaths. In 2012, we had at least 199 heroin-related deaths. They also report that over 1,000 people's lives were saved in 2012 by being given the overdose drug Narcan in the nick of time. What this means is that in 2007, we had about 29 related heroin deaths, and that has increased in just 5 short years to potentially over 1,200 related deaths if it wouldn't have been for the overdose drug Narcan. I'm going to repeat that. In just 5 years, we have gone from 29 related heroin deaths to what could have been 1,200 related deaths. This is the definition of an epidemic and a serious problem that we must get under control fast. I know that many of you people are here because you have been hearing more and more about this drug called heroin, and you came to this Heroin Summit tonight hoping to learn more about the drug and the seriousness of the growing problem. There has been some great information shared here tonight, and I am sure you have accomplished that. They have accomplished that. I am here to tell my daughter Amalia's story, and in doing for several reasons. The first reason, to let everyone know that this can happen. If this can happen to my family, it can happen to yours. The next reason is to challenge each and every one of you to a call of action. We know that this problem has the attention of our congressmen because several of them are here tonight. There has been some new heroin-related bills introduced, but I feel much more needs to be done. We need a combination of increased penalties for all heroin-related crimes, better drug education and awareness in our schools, and more treatment facilities and treatment options. According to the police report, the person responsible for bringing heroin, all the heroin found in Waushara County, was pulled over in Milwaukee County for a traffic stop and found to have a large amount of heroin in his possession 8 months before my daughter died. His penalty for his crime was losing his driver's license for 6 months and a 1-year probation. I can't help but think that if his penalty was much more severe for this crime, maybe my daughter would still be alive. We must all band together and work with our legislators, our schools, our county officials to start turning these numbers back around. This heroin epidemic is spiraling out of control, and unless we do something about it right away, our communities, our state, and most importantly, our kids and grandkids are in big trouble. This brings me to the final and most important reason why I am here tonight. We still have a 14-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter at home that we love just as much as we love Amalia. And we are scared to death of raising them in the current environment where this heroin problem is not only affecting small central Wisconsin communities, but really the whole state of Wisconsin. Hopefully, by hearing my daughter Amalia Henschel's story, everyone can work together to stomp out this heroin epidemic, and nobody here ever have a story that sounds tragically familiar as mine. Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Karen Rux and Beth Mader. Want to step up here?
We'll just take this one. We are here from Drug-Free Communities. You've probably heard Drug-Free Communities mentioned a couple of times tonight. We did start in 2006 addressing the issue of prescription drug abuse and misuse. 2007 was our first drug drop, and we have our annual drug drop every year out at the county fairgrounds, as well as operate the 24/7 drug drop that Steve Olson, who is hiding all the way back there in the back, empties for us, twice a week, probably? So tonight we have thrown a lot of information at you, and we've talked about the call to action. And so we're here to wrap it up before we take our questions to sort of give you some tangible things that we can do for that call to action. For drug-free communities, we're asking that you work on securing your prescription medications. You don't store them, you don't share them. When they're expired or you've run the course, you got a prescription where you decided, you know what, I don't like the way this makes me feel, I'm not gonna take it anymore. Please get rid of it. and get rid of it safely. Utilize our 24/7 drug drop. Bring it to our yearly DEA collection. Do these things because, like we've heard tonight, prescription drug abuse and misuse leads right into this heroin epidemic. And if we can curb it even a little bit on the front end, like we've already worked so hard at in this community, then we can continue to hopefully decrease some of that access for our kids. So our ask of you is, if this sounds like something you would like to be involved in prevention-wise, contact myself, Karen, Janet Lloyd, Steve back there, anyone who's part of Drug Free. Ask how you can get involved. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities in the community, special events, things like that, or just helping maintain our meetings and our structure all year round. So that is our specific ask of you to tie into this night. And then Karen's going to talk about our asks of you in general for our data collection and where we can move forward with this information from here and really bring this as a call to action and take this information and this positive energy that we have here tonight and do something with it. Let's not let it end here.
Yeah, thank you. I think everybody got one of the yellow sheets that has the discussion questions on there, and then on the back side it's got information as to contact information if you want to become involved or whatever. I just wanted to make a comment about, and also survey questions. We want feedback on this. We were not expecting this many people. So I am just totally taken aback, and I'm really excited about this because I think we can really make some positive change in the community. There are various people here from treatment, from law enforcement, and myself, I am involved in the treatment aspect. However, I'm very, very active in the prevention portion of it. So don't discount that kind of work that you can do. We can put you on a mailer list, email list, so you can be aware of what we're doing in the community. But feel free to jot anything down, give us some good feedback, and then we can contact you and let you know how we're going to move forward too. All right? I think that's it. Yep. So thank you. Yep.